Kristin,
Hello, can you hear me?
how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Just jumping from session to session. How's Postman day one going so far?
Fun. I enjoyed listening to Waz today, hearing
That
him
was
tell
pretty
his
cool.
stories. Yeah.
Tough act to follow, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. I'm not worthy.
Were you able to attend any of the sessions or workshops yesterday?
No, I didn't do any of those. I was
Okay.
busy working, but
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure they were good. I went to some, at the last PostCon, and they were great.
yeah. Well, as a newer member of the team, it's super helpful for me as I try to learn all things Postman. So it's good timing from an onboarding perspective. So
Yeah.
cool. I see folks are rolling in here. If you're all looking for Kristin's presentation from Paylocity about getting organized for Postman testing success, you're in the right place. We're going to give folks a few minutes here to get in. I know folks are jumping between sessions, so I like to give a minute or two. But if it works, I'll do a little bit of a few housekeeping items before we get things going. All right. So to the right, you'll all see we have session chat and Slido sections. Just be sure to click the right side there next to session as opposed to event. That's where we'll see questions specific to Kristin's presentation. We'll keep an eye on those questions and we'll save some time for a Q&A at the end. And then also for anyone who's experiencing FOMO for sessions they can't make in case your day job's getting in the way, don't worry, we'll have these sessions on demand typically right after the presentation ends. And then finally, I know this is a new world here with our virtual conferences, but don't forget to check out the expo hall. There's some great sponsors there offering all the good swag we used to be able to get back when traveling was a thing. So games, raffles, prizes like Bose headphones, Amazon gift cards, even an iPhone 12. So don't forget, if you visit every booth, it gets you an additional entry to winning Xbox or the iPad or some of the Postman Galaxy swag. So housekeeping items off the list there. Are you ready to go, Kristin?
I am ready.
Cool. All right, do your thing.
Okay, hi everybody. I am here to talk to you about getting organized for Postman testing success. And first, I'd like to thank the good folks at Postman for having me. And I'd also like to thank all of you for being here. I know there are a lot of sessions happening right now, so thank you for choosing mine. A little bit about me, since you might be wondering who I am. I started out as a music educator. And then in 2007, I had a brief stint as a professional organizer. Then in 2009, I discovered my love for software testing, and I never looked back. Currently, I am the category principal engineer for quality at Paylocity. I also have a blog that I write in regularly at thinkingtester.com, so I welcome you to check that out. And I have a LinkedIn learning course on Postman called Postman Essential Training, and you can get through that, find that link through my website. So over here on the right, we've got a little Venn diagram of me. You can see that I was an educator, I was a professional organizer, I am a software tester. And so today's presentation really represents sort of the confluence of all three things, which is why I am so excited to be talking about this topic today. Okay, a little bit about Paylocity, where I work. Founded in 1997, it's an HR and payroll tech company. Before COVID, we had a 60% remote tech force. Now it's pretty much 100%. And we've been voted one of the Glassdoor best places to work in 2019, 18, 17, and 14. Okay, so our topic today is going to be organized in two parts. Part one is going to be about elements. We're going to be talking about all of the different kinds of Postman elements and the best ways to organize them. And then in part two, we're going to be talking about organizational patterns that you might want to use for your particular application. But before we start with part one, let's think about why we want to get organized. So if you look at this lovely picture over here on the right, you will see, I don't know if this is a basement or if it's a garage. Fortunately, it is not my garage, but it's not in very good shape here. And if I were to decide I wanted to go in there and find, let's say, a hammer, it would probably take me a long time to do that. And if I were to ask somebody else who wasn't familiar with the space to go on in and find that hammer, they probably wouldn't be able to find it either. It would probably take a lot longer. So we get organized in Postman so that you can find your requests quickly, and also so that other people on your team can find your requests quickly. And that way you're not reinventing the wheel. If your teammates can find requests that you have already created, then they don't have to reinvent the wheel to do whatever kinds of testing they need to do. And furthermore, you can also see what your test coverage is, which is really, really helpful when you're dealing with a very large API. So now let's talk about our organizational elements. We will begin with requests. So when you make a request, it's a good idea to stick to naming and capitalization conventions. I'm going to keep on harping on that kind of concept throughout this presentation because they're important, and sometimes you'll find that they're actually even necessary. We'll get to that later. Give your requests descriptive names so that everybody knows what it is that they are doing. Don't include the HTTP verb in the request unless it makes sense to do so. When I first started working with Postman, I would often title my request like get something, and then I noticed that we have this lovely get verb right there beside the title. So all of my requests look like get, which doesn't seem to be very necessary. So I removed the gets from my titles. Don't make the names too long because you want them to be easy to read. And a helpful hint to keep your names from getting too long is to use pipes for visual clarity. So here's an example over here in this employee API. You can see we're doing a number of gets. In every single one of them, we're going to be getting a list of employees, but sometimes we're going to be getting the employees from a multi-company, sometimes we're going to be getting them from a single company, and sometimes we're going to be getting them as a different user, for instance, an admin, an employee, or a terminated user. And so these pipes help us visually see exactly what we're doing very, very quickly. Assertions. So when you write your assertions, think about what you are really trying to assert on, and don't feel like you have to assert on everything. So for example, if you are making a request to, let's say, get somebody's contact info, and it's got their first name and their last name and their phone number and their email and their address, but your test is really just, I made a change to the phone number and I want to make sure that that change has come through, then just assert on the phone number. Don't feel like you have to assert on everything. Put the assertion at the highest level that you can, and we'll talk about that in a couple slides. And finally, give your assertions names that make sense. So here are a couple examples over here on the right. We've got status code is 200. That's pretty clear. It's looking for what's the status code we're going to get back. It's going to be 200. And here's first name is returned in response. You're going to get a response and you want to make sure that a first name is returned in it. So on this next slide, we'll take a look at some bad assertion names and some good assertion names. So a bad assertion name would be status code. Well, what's the status code supposed to be? If somebody is running your request with this assertion and they see that status code failed, well, what does it mean? What were you supposed to get? What didn't you get? A good assertion name is status code is 200. It says exactly what it is that you are expecting for a status code. A bad assertion name is correct record is returned. Well, how do we know that? How are we measuring that the correct record is returned? A good assertion name is correct employee ID is returned. That answers the question. How do we know it's the correct employee? Because we're looking for the employee ID. A bad assertion name is error message is returned. Well, what kind of error message? If the whole application goes down and you get a 500, is that good because you're getting an error message back? A better assertion name is missing last name error message is returned. This tells everybody exactly what you are looking for in that particular assertion. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now let's talk about where to put assertions. So you can put assertions at the collection level, you can put them at the folder level, and you can put them at the request level. So at the collection level, that's a great place to put any assertion that will be the same throughout the collection. So for examples, a header assertion, like let's say you wanted every single one of your responses to come back with a no sniff header. So you might want to put that assertion at the collection level, and then every test you run, every request and assertion you run in that collection is going to assert on that. Or you could do a response code assertion. If you're expecting a 200 response for everything in your collection, then you could assert on that response code there. And finally, this is also a great place for response time assertions. This is a good way to do a little bit of performance testing. If you want to make sure that every single request you run always comes back in less than 3 seconds, this would be a great point to assert that. For the folder level, any assertion that will be the same throughout the folder is a good place to run these. An example could be response code assertions. If all of the response code assertions in your folder are the same, you put that assertion at the folder level. Or a body assertion. If you happen to be getting an identical body back in every single response in that folder, then you could assert on that there. And finally, the request level. So this is good for any assertion that's going to be unique to that request. So examples here would be response code assertions if they vary between requests, or body assertions, or JSON data assertions. Oops. Okay, environments. So first helpful hint is to keep your naming conventions consistent. This makes it very easy to find the environment that you need for your testing. When I first started working with Postman, and I'm sure you've encountered this and other people you know have encountered this, you're running a request and your request comes back and it's not working right, and you're saying, why on earth is that happening? And 9 times out of 10, at least with me, it's because I didn't set the correct environment. So if you've got your naming conventions consistent, it's really easy to look up and see what environment you're in, see if you're in the wrong one. Put the environment in the name with capital letters. I like that because it makes it really, really easy to find. So we've got an example up here for the contact info environment. We've got one for dev, one for stage, one for QA, one for prod. It's really easy to see them because that environment is in capital letters. And keep your environment names short. This is a place where you want to keep those names short, because when you use the drop down to choose the filter for your environment, some of the words will be cut off if your name is too long. So looking at this example here in the bottom right, which environment is the prod environment? Well, we can't really tell because the API with the really, really long name doesn't say what environment it is until after we ran out of room. Okay, variables. Remember that variables are case sensitive. This is where I said it was going to be very important to decide what kind of case sensitivity you want to use and stick with it. When I first started working with Postman, I would have, like, let's say a variable that was called employee, and it was lowercase when I assigned it, but then it was uppercase when I tried to refer to it. And I couldn't figure out why my test didn't pass. So if you've got consistent rules about case sensitivity, if you've decided on that capitalization pattern and you stick to it, then it'll be a lot easier to remember what your variables are and not make that mistake. Now, here is a place where I suggest not using abbreviations, and that is because you will probably forget what they are. So when I was first starting to write some Postman requests, I would use co-ID for company ID. And then I would forget that that's the abbreviation that I had decided to use. And I thought, oh, well, what's my variable as I'm writing my assertions? And then I would have to go back up and look, and maybe it was comp ID, maybe it was co-ID. So if you just decide ahead of time it's going to be company ID, and that company word is going to be written out every single time, then you're not going to forget. It's going to be a lot easier for you to create requests and assertions quickly. And give your variables descriptive names. Don't call them user1, user2. That might make sense to you, but it's not going to make sense to someone else on your team who wants to use your collection and your environment. They're not going to know what user1 is. So give them something that makes more sense, like user with credentials, user without credentials, user with admin access. All of those things are very, very clear to anyone, even somebody who it's day one and they're working with this particular collection. Folders. One of my favorite things about Postman is all of the ways that we can use folders. And I recommend keeping everything in a folder. So you might have paperwork at home, and you know that if you don't, like if you've got bills or receipts or something like that that you want to keep track of, you know that you can't just put it in a pile on your desk. You need to have a folder for everything, and you need to put every piece of paper into a folder so that it will be easy to find. And it's the same thing with Postman, even though it's digital. So I recommend keeping everything, every single request in a folder, and follow a pattern when you choose what to put in a folder. So make your folders consistent and make sense. Give your folders easy to read names. And finally, once again, stick to naming and capitalization conventions. That just makes it easier to scan down. So over here on the right, we've got a folder called Video Encoding. And it's going to test how videos are encoded when we upload them. And we've got 4 subfolders, and each one is for a different kind of video. So we've got MP4 videos, we've got MOV videos, we've got WMV videos. And then finally, we have a 4th folder for non-videos, everything that isn't really a video for our negative testing. Collections. So I suggest naming your collection after your API. That way, if anybody on your team or if anybody on a different team within your company wants to find your collection and use it to test the application, they can look after the API name to find what it is. Use a naming convention with standard spacing and capitalization so it's easy to read and easy to scan through. And finally, use the favorites function to move your most used collections to the top of your workspace. So here we've got some collections, and ordinarily the collections are in alphabetical order, but let's say you're using this file access API more than anything else and you'd really like to be able to get to it quickly. You just click that little star, and that means you favorited it, and that means it will always be at the top. And workspaces. So each team should have its own workspace. And you should keep everything you need for your application in that workspace. Share only necessary things in the team workspace. So if you've got a personal project you're working on, or if you have something experimental you're trying out, put that in your personal space. Don't put that in the team workspace, because it's just going to clutter things up. It's going to make it hard for your team to find what they need. If what you have in the personal space eventually becomes something that you want to share with your team, then you just go ahead and share it in that team workspace. And decide who should have admin rights in the workspace. It's been my experience that if too many people have admin rights, it's easy for someone to inadvertently make a change and not realize that the change that they just made in the team workspace affects everybody, and suddenly you've got requests and assertions that you had that are not working anymore. So probably just 1 or 2 people per team should have that admin access. All right, now we have a fun exercise called Which is Easier to Use? So on the next slide, you're going to see 2 test collections for the same API. This is the RESTful Booker API, which you may have seen if you've been learning about API testing. It allows users to create, update, and delete hotel bookings. And so when I go to the next slide, you're going to see 2 collections. One is the very well organized RESTful Booker collection, and the other one is the disorganized RESTful Booker collection. And what I'm going to ask you to do is find where the request is to update a booking where the booking ID is not found. And I'd like you to try to find it in the collection on the left first. And then after you've worked on that for a little while, try to find it in the collection on the right. Okay, here we go. I'll just give you about a minute to take a look at this. Okay, so let's take a look first at the organized RESTful booker over here on the right. So my request to you was to find that request that was updating a booking and the booking was not found. So I can see here I've got two main folders. I've got happy path requests, I've got negative requests. So right away I know I'm going to look here in the negative requests. And I know I'm updating a booking, so that means I want to look for the put. So it could be this one. Well, what does it do? Booking not found. There you go. That was pretty easy to find. Now let's try to find it over here in the badly organized RESTful booker. So we've got happy path requests. We've got negative requests. This was a little hard to see because it wasn't capitalized, but I do see this folder icon here. So I can tell here's my negative requests. I know it's going to be a put request. So it's probably this one, but I can't really tell because what happened here was that somebody saved this request with the URL as the title instead of giving it a title that everybody would know and understand. So the only way I'm really going to know if this is the right answer is if I open up that request and actually look at what it's asking for. So I hope you can see, comparing the badly organized collection with the nicely organized collection, just how much of a time difference it can make when you are looking for that request that you need. All right, we are moving on now to organizational patterns. So I'm going to be talking about 4 different scenarios that you might have with your API, and then recommending 4 different organizational patterns that you could use for it. So we will start with this scenario. You have a simple API for managing your customer's contact info. The API has operations to create, update, retrieve, and delete customers. And then the create and update operations have field validations. So for this scenario, I recommend what I call the happy path, sad path pattern. It's good for smaller APIs. The happy path folder can be used as a quick regression check, and then the sad path folder can be used for validation checking. So over here, we've got the contact list API. We've got 2 folders. This is my happy path folder here, basic endpoint tests. This is very good if somebody says to me, hey, I just made a change to the API. Can you quick run through the endpoints, make sure they all work? This would be a great folder to run. And then here's a folder for negative tests. This is the sad path folder. Here's where we have all the things that might go wrong, from not being able to find the contact to missing the first name when you're adding a contact, and so on. Scenario 2. You have an API for managing your department's training inventory. The inventory has endpoints for adding, updating, retrieving, and deleting entries for videos, podcasts, books, and blog posts. So that's a lot of different kinds of endpoints. So for this, I recommend the endpoint pattern. This is good for APIs with lots of endpoints. You have a folder for each type of endpoint, and then you have subfolders with different operation types. And if you want, you can even add subfolders with happy path, sad path requests in them. So here's our example. We've got a training inventory API, and you can see the top level folders are all of the different kinds of things we have: videos, podcasts, books, blog posts. And then within blog posts, this one's opened up, you can see we've got some subfolders: add blog post, get blog post, update blog post, delete blog post. And then we've got some, a couple of those subfolders have been opened up, and you can see that we've got both positive and negative requests here. We've got updating the blog post, and then we've got a couple of negative requests for updating a blog post. And if you wanted to, you could put this one in a subfolder and this one in a subfolder, and this would be the happy path and this would be the sad path. Okay, next scenario. You have an online bookstore that needs to manage customer orders. Customers can create and update their account, search for a book, place an order, and request a return. So for this, I recommend the user stories pattern. This is good for customer workflows. It can have a folder for each workflow, and it can have subfolders for different scenarios. So you can see the top level folders here in our online bookstore are create new account, update account, search for a product, make a purchase, request a product return. And then in our make a purchase folder, you can see we've got some subfolders with different workflows like customer completes purchase, customer cancels purchase, customer updates cart before purchase. Okay, in our fourth scenario, you have a student transcript API that manages the grades for all the students at a college. You want to make sure that bad data doesn't get into the database because that would be very unfortunate for the students who want to make sure that their grades are accurate. You also want to make sure that only authorized users can read and update the data because it would be very bad if a student could go in and change her own grades. So for this scenario, I recommend the validation type pattern. So this is good for APIs that require a lot of validation. It's also good for security testing because those two things go hand in hand very nicely. So you can have folders for things like missing data, character limit violations, invalid characters, invalid data types. So here in our student transcript API, we've got them organized by the different kinds of validations we're going to be doing. We've got one for header validations, one for JSON validations, one for URL validations, and then one for security validations. So in our JSON body validations, we've organized by what kind of validation error you're going to have. So here's a folder for all the missing field requests that you might have. Here's a folder for the invalid field type. Here's a folder for field length violations. And then you can see in our subfolder for our security validations, we've got some requests for the student scope. We want to make sure that a student can't request another student's grades. We want to make sure that the student can't update their own grade. And then we've got an instructor scope where we want to make sure that the instructor can get the student's grade, but not from, oh, actually, these are just two negative ones. So can't request a student's grade from another class, can't upgrade the student in the other class. And that is all I have for you. What questions do you have?
Nice job, Kristin.
Oh, thanks. Let's see, here's a question. How can you share a folder collection with different workspaces? That's pretty easy. If I had Postman open, I would show you. You just right-click on the dot menu that's next to the folder or the collection, and there's an option that says share, and then you just share with that other workspace.
I actually have a question for you, Kristin.
Yeah.
So as a member of the customer success team, we harp on the importance of naming conventions and organization all the time, especially given, the importance of collaboration and how we see customers continue to adopt the product across multiple teams. So these are super helpful recommendations for us. Anything from maybe from a self-serving point of view, anything we can do better as a vendor to make that experience easier and help folks kind of protect them from themselves in terms of following some of these best practices and naming conventions as they grow? Or is that a conversation for another time?
That is a great question. Whenever anybody at Postman asks, what would I want to do to improve the product? My number one thing is environments. I would like it so that when you click on the drop down to choose the environment, that you can see the whole entire name and that it doesn't get truncated. That's my biggest request.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we've written that down somewhere, but I'll check on where that is in the backlog. So. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Kristin. Anything else? Sorry, before we wrap up.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say thank you for coming. Put in another plug for my website, thinkingtester.com, where you can find my regular blog posts, and you can also find a link to my LinkedIn Learning course on Postman. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And yes, we'll have these presentation slides and the recording shortly on the main reception area. So thanks, everybody.